had an enjoyable pre-talk as Andrew is drinking his coffee and becoming human again. And so I'm going to give a short introduction and then we'll get into it, or rather continue. So welcome everyone to this final From Business to Buttons Design Lunch. My name, as you might know, is David de Leon. I'm a design director at InUse, and I will be your host for the coming hour. Today, I have the immense pleasure of speaking to Andrew LaMonica. Andrew has a very long experience as a designer and within design leadership. He has been a global design director and brand strategist at GE, a design expert in residence at InVision, and he's also worked with clients like Bloomberg, LinkedIn, and Adobe. And interesting on his track record is the fact that he has helped the International Olympic Committee as a global design and brand executive. I certainly hope to hear a bit about that. What did that entail? The previous sessions we've had have been relaxed chats. It's mostly been me and our guest. Today, we really want to encourage you to engage in the conversation. Me and Andrew had a quick chat last week, and he demonstrated very ably his ability at coaching. So we had this kind of 3-minute coaching session, but was really useful and very powerful. I enjoyed that. And I'd like you to take the opportunity to go through the same. But obviously you don't have to, someone might want to do that. Feel free to just post your questions. You can post them anonymously if you have reason to do so. So there are lots of different levels of engagement available to you today. You can talk to us directly. You can post a question, you can post it anonymously, but really want you to participate today because on the 13th of May, we'll have Andrew on stage. We're not going to be able to chat with him, hopefully after all the talks, but today is a real unique opportunity. I don't know what it would cost to engage Andrew privately. So this is, make use of this, the value provided.
David, thank you. Thank you so much. That was an awesome introduction. I'll also +1 that too. I'm super accessible. Like social media, you can reach out to me. Like I always try to chat, even though I'm a pretty significant introvert and my batteries get drained after events like this. But like, you can find me, you can talk to me. But here's a really great opportunity where we can kind of chat. This also gives me some insight on where to lean into when I'm in your neck of the woods. So I could just give you as much value as I can, because that's actually what's important to me, is to be able to provide you content and value that's helpful. So David, thank you. Thank you very much.
So good to have you here. And I looked at Twitter yesterday just to see what your most recent posts were. And one of them was you were saying, I'm keeping open office hours for designers, drop me a line. What does this stem from, this desire to help and being so available? Because you can tell it's not just talk, you really are.
Yeah, no worries. It's a really good question to open up too. I've been doing that for about 2 decades. So those standing office hours are a thing. Wow. It was something that was always important to me. I was never the best student at university or best designer. I was always kind of middle class. And I got really good at asking people for help, which is something that's actually hard for a lot of designers and something hard for leaders, executives too, to actually go and be like, hey, I need help with X, and I was always grateful for the support that I got from, just all walks of life and, in the design world too. So that was always my thing to pay it forward. And that got codified when I joined GE. So I was on the CMO's team there. It was like my first actual design executive job. it was like a thing. And leadership was always a core pillar for GE. At the time it was a Fortune 10, quite epic in its scope. And coaching people, mentoring people, leading people was very much a part of the culture. It was just expected of you too. And then that got further codified. It was 3 weeks on the job. And my manager at the time, we're going over my job description, here's the 14 things that I need to deliver in my role. And he's like, oh, by the way, Beth Comstock has an ask of you. Beth Comstock, the vice chair of GE, She's like number 2 in charge, probably one of the most impressive, not just women in business, but just people in business, period. You know, he said, you know, Beth has an ask of you. She wants you to elevate the level of design at GE, like period, full stop. I was like, okay, great. And part of doing that work, which is probably another design lunch chat, but part of doing that was working with the design community global at GE and also talking with my peers at places like IBM and, you know, like other institutions. And it's like, you know, that idea of coaching and helping designers was a gap. You know, there wasn't a place for that. So, you know, realizing that there was a need, you do what you can to fill that gap. You know, this type of work has always been important to me, and it's needed in the culture, and it helps.
Mm.
You know, so that's the short monologue. I'm sure you have 1,002 questions for me, but just to ground everybody with context.
Yeah, and everything you say prompts twice or the amount of questions that I initiated
sure.
with. So this prompted one question is, I know it's an entire topic, but how would one go about raising the design quality or proficiency at an entire organization?
Very good question. The blueprint for something like that, and I'll preface this by saying, like, this is what worked for me, and this is what worked for GE at that time. You know, I don't want people to be like, hey, we're going to take this model and use it for us, because it doesn't always work. You know, having an understanding of the culture and how the culture works as an ecosystem, you know, and how to navigate it, it's probably an important thing. You know, you need to know what the appetite is for elevating design, and you need to know how to do that in a thoughtful way. So one of the first things I did was develop a platform where people can talk. It's just like, once you put that voice out there and be like, hey, we're going to do this, things get a little bit easier. It started off as a conference call. It was one of the largest conference calls you would ever imagine being on. But it was one of these things where I'm like, okay, cool, we're going to get everybody together and provide value. And I broke up those first couple sessions as, hey, here's kind of a state of the union of design at GE. You know, I had an interesting point of view because I was on the CMO's team, and, you know, I brought in the chief creative officer and strategist, and like, hey, this is what GE's doing, because I worked from a central function that helped the entire org. Then I talked about design leadership, and I talked about some product design UX best practices and things like that. I brought in people, experts, both internally and externally. And the fourth thing that I did was I highlighted some of the really great stuff that was happening. So it became like a nice showplace for all the work. Now, GE is a really interesting company because they do so many things. There's like 14 tier 1 businesses, like everything from like aviation to healthcare to oil and gas. But the design problems are similar. You know, so it became this really great space where, you know, the designers in aviation could showcase and share work and talk about problems, but it was also similar to what was going on at GE Digital, you know, where that cross-pollination of ideas. And through the sharing is where the community gets built. And when the community gets built, by nature, you know, the rising tide raises all ships, and kind of elevated that. It was really impressive. By the end of, I think, 18 months, I 40x'd the community, which is a lot. So there's people engaged, and it was kind of running autonomously by itself. There was, I think, 98% user satisfaction of people who were like, yeah, this is a really good thing. There's a really good program. And it was really nice to see some of the people who started to step up and to take ownership of this, to really start doing amazing stuff, both in GE and when they left. So it's a pretty good case study. That was high level.
High level, of course. And it sounds like the main thing was you were just enabling this. You were making sure that people could meet up and talk and share stuff, and then it kind of grew from there.
Oh yeah, I mean, and for those of you taking notes at home, one of the most important things a design leader needs to do is you need to give your team a voice, you need to remove their obstacles, and you need to get the hell out of their way. Like, so those 3 things, you're good as a design leader. But yeah, that's what it is. It's giving the opportunity, removing the challenges, bringing people together, just get the hell out of their way to do great work.
That's a fabulous formula. I want to get back just to one thing you said earlier, which was people, it's hard to ask for help. I certainly find that it's hard to ask for help. Any advice?
Forgive me. What is it about
why do
asking?
designers, they should be asking for more help and from each
Yes.
other, and they don't tend to? And
Okay.
why is that? And what can we do about it?
Okay. All right. So we'll make it real for a second. So what is it about asking for help that's challenging for you?
I think that, well, obviously there is the being vulnerable. There is the issue of, it can often be hard when you have a problem to formulate the problem, you know, have an unclear problem, but yet you need help with it. And to get help, you need to sometimes communicate clearly. So there's a tension between those two things.
All right. So you said two things. One was vulnerability. One was how to operationalize. What's got the most energy behind it? What's more challenging for you?
I have no problem showing my work. So my problem is, how do I break this down so that I can get help? But usually I don't know. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure why I don't ask for as much help as I should. Why could that be? I hope you're all interested, dear listeners. Sometimes it's just stress. You're working hard to, moving between things. You don't realize that that stopping and getting help is going to save you time. So sometimes it's just this kind of stupid efficiency in running.
Okay.
Maybe that's what happens a lot of the time.
All right. So what you just presented was a false dichotomy, where you said, like, I don't want to ask for help because it would take too long. Is that true?
I don't think it does. I think it is a false dichotomy. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then the question becomes is what is it about getting things done quickly that is stopping you from asking for help?
I'm not sure I understand that question. What is it about getting things done quickly?
You said it was an efficiency thing, a speed thing that was stopping you from asking for help. So what is it about getting things done quickly, which is more important than doing it right or getting help?
Maybe that's, it's a question of having too many things and not prioritizing, and thereby working quickly on in each available time slot.
All right, so this is interesting. I'm going to insert myself into this conversation real quick. And Anna, thank you for chiming in on the chat that you're doing this. If anyone else has to chime in too, that's great. All right, cool. So behaviorally, when you start focusing on multiple things at once, you are actually 50% less effective at each one of those things. And I think there's about 50% more errors. So when you do the multitasking thing, when you start working on multiple things like this, just the data shows that you are less effective. Okay, so just make that point out there too. So you're trying to do multiple things, and then you touched on something which seems to be a need, whereas like, how do you prioritize? So you said like there's a lot of things that you need to do. So tell me about your prioritization matrix.
My prioritization matrix is awful. It's say yes to lots of things until the bucket is full. And then for some reason, new things turn up and the bucket overflows. This is my quite awful method of prioritization.
That's actually pretty common. If anyone wants to do some light Googling, you should check out the Important Urgent Index. Business schools sometimes teach this as the Eisenhower matrix. It's a great framework. I talk about this in a couple of my talks. I'll throw it in the chat afterwards, where it's a great simple tool for prioritization for things like this. So going back to your original ask about asking for help. It seems that if you were able to ask for help, you would be more efficient at what you're doing. Is that accurate? Yeah,
I would say so.
Okay. So where would you like to get to? Like, what is the solution that you want?
I think what I would like to get to is for that to be one of my first options rather than something that comes much later. I'd like to think of it earlier. I think that would be very useful.
So what cues can you put in place to remind yourself to ask for help earlier rather than later?
Whew. What cues can I put in place?
It doesn't have to be one, it can be many. Designers, because we're visual in nature, sometimes we like visual cues, where it's in a calendar, like where it's 10 minutes in the morning.
Yep.
Put a note on your calendar says, what do I need to ask for help with? Okay.
Oh, I love it.
There you go. Sometimes in the project timeline, if you do Gantt charts, like, hey, just make them in every phase. Be like, in the beginning, where are we going to ask for help? Like those are just two, I'm making those up off the top of my head. What works for you though? You know, that's the thing, is to get you or your teams, because this is a problem that leaders have with their direct reports all the time. How can you help them identify the cues that'll help solve their problem? One, like you do that one because they're more likely to do it. Two is they're going to figure out something that's going to work for them. You know, like me, I need visual cues, partly because I'm a designer, also because I have pretty significant ADHD. And visual cues, very critical. Writing notes, making things down, super important. So go back to your question, what's going to work for you?
First of all, I love that idea of putting cues and triggers in the environment somehow. I mean, that's all aligned with behavioral design, but I think I really like your question, which I will use with my team, and ask that, you know, what could you put in your, you know, what cue can you create so that this will happen? And I think you already answered my need, which is maybe just book a standing time slot in the morning or afternoon, or a reminder in the middle of the day. What could I get help with? So I'll start doing that immediately. And if my team is on here, you know, keep me to it.
Well, you actually brought up a really good point. Something else for, you know, everybody at their lunch to take notes of too. When you're doing habit change, which is what this is, when you're trying to like instill a new behavior trait or a new habit that you want to do that'll make you more efficient, that'll make you a better design leader. Something to do is like, one, what's going to work for you? You actually have to think about that. What's going to work? Because like I could say like, put notes in your calendar, but if you never check your calendar, it's not going to work for you. Which brings us to the second point: make it easy. Like you want to go for a run in the morning, put your clothes and put your sneakers by your bed.
Yeah.
It's going to be easy. You're going to see it. It's going to be the first thing. It's going to be great. Time of day is important too. You have more willpower earlier in the day than you do later in the day. And then also spans by the week. Like you have more willpower earlier in the week than you do at the end. So if you're asking for help is going to be a habit change you want to do, you know, do it in the morning. Make sure it's in the morning. Make sure it's like, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you know, things like that. And just, you want to make it easier to do. You want to make it something that's going to work for you. And you talked on it too, David, is how can you engage a support system for it? How can your team keep you honest? You know, I've worked with teams where we've like instituted, like, we're going to have a help day every Wednesday. Team's going to get together, part of our staff meeting, standing meeting, who needs help with what? That's
lovely.
There you go. So there's some frameworks. I'll get back to you, David. What's next?
I love it.
I should say, was that helpful?
It was really helpful and inspiring. And I want to get back to a question we should have started with, but you know, there's just so many exciting topics. So conversation keeps going. And that is, for those who don't know you, Andrew, could you tell them a tiny bit about yourself? Like what's a typical day or a typical week like for you? What's your day job?
My day job. I have a lot of them. The most important one is I'm a dad. I got 3 young kids under 6. So my day, that are an important part of my day. Because I have 3 kids, I usually have to get up early in order to like get my day set. So like I'm usually up around this time anyway. For those of you playing along at home, it's about 6 in the morning for me. So I usually get like the important work that I need to get done, whether it's responding to specific emails, if it's doing strategy work, if it's, you know, taking care of a contract, or if it's, you know, doing an employee report, whatever that priority is for the day, I try to get that done, or at least started before my kids get up. And I'll do, like, we do the morning breakfast thing, take the kids to school, something like that, usually come back. And then I start my day. Another note for those of you at home as well is you want to start your day with the 1 or 2 things that are most important to that day, whatever it is. It could be doing strategy, it could be doing wireframes, mapping customer journey, whatever that important thing is, you want to get that done early. Because that's when your brain is the most effective to actually think through those problems. Designers, we're considered knowledge workers, much like a lawyer or an engineer, where it's like our brain is the thing that is important to us, be able to think through problems. So you want to work when your brain is working and it's most efficient. So that's usually in the morning for people. Not to be confused with like that knowledge stuff with creative work, where if you're doing brainstorming, things like that, those are usually good after lunch. So if you're going to do like don't schedule your brainstorm in the morning, because it accesses a different part of the brain. So usually when you're fed and you're nourished is a better idea to have more creative output. There's really phenomenal research on this stuff. It's great. And I actually kind of structure, like when we're doing design crits or we're doing that type of work, I usually structure those after lunch, and I'll do strategy work probably in the morning. What else? You're asking about my, yeah, my day is a lot of meetings. Like I'm working with people. So as an executive, like most of the stuff that I have to deal with is people problems. Like I'm not doing the user journeys or the personas or anything like that. Like I'm working with teams to help them be more efficient, or I'm doing headcount, allotting of resources, trying to figure out overall big stuff. So that usually is like conversations with people. And that's a note that's always surprising when I talk to designers and product leaders, is that like really half of my day is working with people. It's doing the influence and persuasion. It's doing the people management. It's addressing the people problems. You know, in my career, I have, I've done design strategy for a $42 billion company. I've done a rebrand of a Fortune 10. I've done work that is globally expansive. My biggest problem is people. And that's been consistent in the 2 decades that I've been doing this. It's just like, yeah, you got to do that stuff. Ending my day, I usually try to get out at a reasonable time, like go for a walk at the end of the day to clear my mind. Meditation is really important to me, like being mindful. Like I'm a big fan of that. It's great. I highly recommend it. And there's like a ton of apps out there that people can use. It's like, I use this thing called Headspace, which is like the best money I ever spent. And I'm not getting paid to say this. I just think it's a good product. And it's good. It's just like windshield wipers for the mind. It just kind of clears off all the gunk. Do that. And then I like to cook a lot. So dinner is really important to me and my family. So we do a big dinner together and then we just kind of relax. So that's the short version of my day. With probably a whole lot more context than anyone really cared about.
But it did raise, it was nice to get a little peek into your life, but it did also kind of highlight a couple of things about being a designer, which is, you said mostly about people. It's about the people we design for, the people we design with, the people who are asking us to design. And a lot of it's to do with this kind of managing yourself, your own mind, like working at the right time. And that's certainly not what most people expect of a design job. They're kind of thinking in terms of hands-on wireframing or making a thing, when it's maybe more about yourself and people.
Yeah, I think the idea of being human-centered, being user-focused is a big part of our job, thinking through those problems. The idea of taking care of yourself, that self-care and, that mindfulness is important, because if you're not at your peak performance, you can't deliver. Like, think of yourself like an athlete. You are a high-performing athlete and you need to be able to deliver on those things. That's a big part of that. So I'm with you on that. I know we're maybe like 25 minutes into this. If you all can do me a favor and just go into the chat and just let me and David know if this is helpful, like a simple yes or a thumbs up, like, is this value to you? Because like, I could do this all day, but I just want to make sure that like we're giving you stuff that's useful. So Adrian likes this. Jackie, Teresa, yes. Oh, okay. Oh, this is great. Awesome. Okay,
well,
cool.
And thank you for excellent timing there, Andrew, because I was thinking, I'm enjoying it so much, I've got to give someone else a shot. And so one way to break into this is I'll give you a couple of questions that I've received from my colleagues, and hopefully the people in the chat might be spurred to ask similar questions. So
great. And it seems like there were a couple questions in the chat too. If anyone's on your side, just please make sure to scrape the chat. So if I don't get to your question today, I'm super responsive. I will answer it either in social media or directly. Like, I will answer your question. I'll usually stay here until David kicks me off, and then I'll do more work afterwards, but more than happy to answer every single question that's asked of me today. Okay, so thank you very much.
And I see one question here immediately. It goes, let's see. they say, I have a question for later, but let's make that now. You came, I'm sure you can see this. I'll read it.
Hey, Jenny.
You
Okay,
came
cool.
into GE as an expert leadership position. I suppose you had all ears from day one. What's your hottest tip for drumming up some interest in design processes as an unknown newbie in a large and very design immature organization?
Okay. I don't know if that's Jenny or Lisa.
This seems to be
/
Lisa.
Okay, fantastic. Really great question. Let me clarify a couple things. Yes, I had a title of subject matter expert. I would never claim myself as an expert, and there's a certain amount of humility when you join a Fortune 10. And you also join that particular team. The CMO, Linda Boff, she's still there. One of the best leaders I've ever worked with. She's phenomenal. But there's a certain amount of humility that's there. So I'll just clarify that. I did not have all ears from day one. There's a certain amount of like, all right, like you're hired, so we expect you to be very good at your job. But there's a matter of like, you have to, truth is shown by action, not conviction. Got to prove it. You got to be thoughtful. You got to contribute. And you need to understand how to navigate the culture there. That was actually a sharp left turn for me because I ran an agency before that. I was never in-house in corporate. So I had to learn how to navigate. It was hard. I had a couple like long conversations with my manager. Still one of the best managers I ever had, Rich Narasaki. He's a great guy. Where he's like, look, like this is how the culture is. Like, you got to figure this out. And we put strategies in place on really how to figure out to do those things, so I want to just be very transparent about that. I know I have some like really impressive asterisks in my LinkedIn profile, but like, I'm just like y'all, I have to learn, I had to grow, I asked for a lot of help, there's a lot that goes into that. So what is your tip for drumming up some interest in design processes as an unknown newbie in a large and very design immature organization? Well, I wouldn't say it was immature. It's probably a level 3 or 4 on the scale. And it was just in different pockets. But I think the question behind your question is gaining interest from people who are not designers. And also like, if you want to come live and have this conversation, we could do that too. Some things that are helpful are grab the low-hanging fruit. As a designer, introduce your stuff, start solving the problems that are easily solvable, okay? You want quick wins, especially when you're new to an organization. You have about 100 days until your reputation is pretty solid. And people think of you whatever they're going to think of you. I give a talk about onboarding into a design leadership role that's on my site. I actually go a deep dive into this, so you should check that out. So grab the low-hanging fruit, have some quick wins. A lot of things that happen when you're trying to get interest in design processes, and I see this happen a lot, is where designers speak design. Don't do that. You want to address something called the with it. It's the what's in it for them. So whenever you're talking about design, you before that need to have a clear understanding of the stakeholder that you're working with. What's important to them? What do they care about? Could be efficiencies, could be cost reduction, could be customer attrition, whatever it is. Like, you really need to understand that before you even start presenting design work. And then once you understand what their needs are, what's important to them, your entire conversation is how design processes are helping to accelerate that happening. Okay? So that's, I mean, I can go into deeper on this too, but I just wanted to give a high level of kind of like how that goes. And Lisa, if you have more questions, if you need clarity on this, feel free to throw it in the channel or ping me directly.
There is another question. Someone is calling back to your very quick formula for good design leadership, where you say how to give a team a voice, how to remove barriers, how to get out of the way. This is Danwei Tran Luciani, and sorry if I'm butchering the pronunciation of your name. And this person is asking, how do we realize these tips? Maybe, so they're a bit high level. Could we go down one level of abstraction?
All right. Anyway, I'm going to talk for a little bit, but while I'm talking, I'd like you to throw into the chat, what about doing those 3 things is hard for you? So I'm curious, because this is a very specific question, because again, I can answer for it for what was like for me, like what I did, but that's what worked for me. So sometimes it's really helpful to understand like what the challenge is and helping the designer navigate those challenges. So in other words, can you give me some examples of how to give a team a voice? All right. So what I did is I was like, hey, everybody, we're going to jump on a Zoom call once a month. We're going to talk. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is have the conversation, distill the notes, socialize them. Hey, here are the 10 things that we talked about, everybody. Am I missing anything? Or have a shared Google Doc, super helpful for stuff like this. As a design leader, it's your job to elevate those voices. So what I did is at the end of every month, at the end of those calls, at the end of those sessions, I did a readout to my manager. It's like, hey, here's what's going on. And it got to the point after the first month, he's like, you should give this directly to Linda. And so went around that and he's like, Linda, here's what I'm doing. How can I help you do your job as chief marketing officer in this organization with this platform that I have? So just see how the things are kind of connected. So you do things like that. How do you remove barriers? I need more details out of that one. Usually it's by having more conversations with your direct reports and finding out what the challenge is and working with them to understand it, to clarify it, like what you can do to give them air cover. Like David mentioned something earlier when he was talking about asking for help. He's like, I kind of don't know what the problem is. Something that I've seen happen with direct reports and their managers, like those are great opportunities for you to very clearly go to your manager or go to your team or go to the individual you work with, but like, hey, look, I need help thinking through something. Can we chat for 10 minutes? And not asking for help is like, I need someone to I need a sounding board. I need someone to think through these things to kind of understand what the problem is. Because there's a lot of times like you don't know what it is until you know what it is. If you knew what it was, you'd be able to solve it. So those are really helpful. And the third thing you said was how to get out of their way. I see this a lot with leaders who index high on micromanaging, which is another thing to navigate. But getting out of their way is being like, hey, I trust you to do this. Go. When you need help, reach out to me, or I'll check in with you in a week. Just go. And by doing that, to be like, look, I trust you to solve this. Really good for building psychological safety at work, in both relationships with the direct report and with the manager too. And also like you're instilling a confidence in the individual and the designer that, they're good at what they're doing and they're on the right direction. Usually a behavior like that 10x's and their performance just grows really, really well.
There's a question that's come up that relates really well to the thing that you're just answering, Andrew, and that's here's a situation where Anna says, I can see 10 to 15 things in a design sketch that are incorrect. How can I help the team in the best way?
What is the outcome that you're trying to get? And while I'm talking, you should comment in the chat, like what's the outcome you're trying to do? So there are certain things happen in a design sketch where, people just point out errors. Like, okay, cool, like that doesn't help. I like to focus the issues on, oh, Anna, you just wrote in the chat. So this is a feedback thing, not a crit thing. How to give feedback? Is that right? Give the customer a correct function. Oh, cool. Okay. Here's a method that's really good. It's called SSOI. The S stands for where you talk, and this actually works with designers too. You can talk to the customer and be like, all right, cool. Like, what is the self-observation? Like, what are you seeing in this sketch? What are you seeing this like? Because you want to get their view of what their perspective is on this too. The second S is the second S is like where you are stating what you see. Okay, so first it's self, then it's stating what you see in this. Be like, okay, cool. So this is what is going on over here. O stands for outcome. Okay, so if it's incorrect, be like, okay, the outcome of what you just sketched here, or what's in this user flow or whatever, is that the person's not going to know where the login screen is, or this is going to be really difficult. The impact, which is the last part, the SSLI, the impact of this is you are not going to get people to register. You're going to have customer attrition. You're not going to hit the numbers that you need to, whatever it is. This is all business focused. You never say this is a shitty sketch. Excuse my language, sorry. You never say this is a bad sketch. You never say, like, you never do any feelings or emotions like that, at least not in this particular feedback framework. But you focus on the business reasons and the business impact. This is a really great framework. I've used this a ton. It's really good. Is that helpful, Anna? Okay, cool.
AB Fab.
Ab Fab, great show. Missed that.
Brilliant. As we wait for more questions, I'm going to read one that I received earlier, that I prepared earlier.
Right.
Let's see. This is quite a big one, really. And it's about the fact that as designers, especially if we're consultants, we come in someplace and we're often asked to create some kind of digital artifact, but very rarely do digital artifacts, they can't do everything. I mean, usually someone needs to maintain them. Maybe the organization needs to change. Maybe you redesign something and suddenly you need someone to edit content. And so often as consultants, we come in and design things, but for those things to really work, the organization needs to change. And that is really hard, especially if you come in as a digital designer. So here's the dilemma. This person is asking, how do I influence the organization to do those other things that are required for this design to actually fly?
I'm assuming this is like a big digital transformation piece.
Yeah, imagine a total redesign, maybe of a
Sure.
something big.
All right. This is hard. And just for context. Oh, somebody's on mic.
Ghost.
It's okay. No worries. It's all good. This is kind of hard. And one of the interesting things about, in a previous role, I was kind of like the main design guy, and there were 417 agencies that we worked with, which is way too many. But one of the biggest problems was, they would propose a lot of these big digital transformation pieces, but not understanding how to navigate the culture. Not understand, okay, once we do this big website, like what's going to happen afterwards on that. So that problem is not uncommon. One of the things that happens, which I try to talk about up front, is that there's usually a behavioral or a cultural component to this big work. And I have that conversation in the opening meeting. Be like, all right, cool. We're going to do this website redesign for you. Like, we will. The challenge is, I can tell you right now, it's not going to be as effective as you want it to be, because there's culture things that need to happen. If you're working with a big enterprise, usually there's a cultural transformation unit or someone who's involved in that. It's ideally important to bring that conversation up with whoever the point person is on the company side, to be like, look, in order for this to work, you need to do this. In the same way that, like, look, if we're going to build a site, in order for it to work, we need the personas, we need the user flows, we need developers, like, it needs to happen. So you got to have that conversation at the get-go. Now, that's hard for a lot of companies. That's actually the biggest reason why most digital transformations in global organizations fail, because they can't figure that out. So it's a thing. And the better you are at that, and how you can develop that, the easier that job becomes. I always encourage people to have an organizational psychologist in your Rolodex, not to date myself with that word, but just to know a few of them, because those people are really good at this, being able to help navigate the culture component of the design work. I also think it's important to get all of the stakeholders involved in this and have this conversation with them. Be like, look, I just want everyone to know that this really needs to happen. So what are your thoughts about this? Are we going forward? Are you going to take care of this internally? What do you need to do? It's probably where I'd start with that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to follow up on my colleague's question, which is, I have this sense that we often take on projects where we know that it's bigger or should be bigger, but we kind of accept the premise anyway because we want the work, and we also hope that we will be able to influence them during the course of that work. So,
how's that working out for you?
Sorry?
How does that work out?
Well, it's leading to the project to exactly the problem that my colleague has raised. So, what would you advise there? Is it to still just make sure to have that conversation and say, for you to actually get value from this, it has to be this way?
I've gotten a lot of value out of a very simple question. What's the outcome you want? Like talking to the individual on the other side of the table, be like, what are you trying to do? What is the outcome you want? Because sometimes that doesn't require a big thing. Sometimes it requires a small thing. Or you can say like, all right, cool. If that's what you want, your budget and your scope is only able to do X. So being transparent with those conversations are important. Being clear on what the objective is. And I would encourage every designer on this call to stop doing that. Like, stop trying, I've been there too, and I love it. I'll be like, hey, there's this great thing that we can do, but if the budget is X and the scope is Y, like, that's all you're going to be able to do, because that's keeping you from doing other work. You know, and I like to make this note as well, especially when I talk to big audience, is good clients beget good clients. So working with a good client, working with a good scope where everything's really good, will get you more good clients. The corollary is true. Working with bad clients, where there's scope and there's change, all this will beget more bad clients. And I've seen this happen so many times. So stop doing that.
We will certainly stop. That's great. I like that. And I really like the corollary there that that you ended on, that it's the kind of self-perpetuating, that you think it's it's a one-off and it's gonna turn out good, but it's really not the route that you want to take.
And from personal experience, like, I've been designing since I was 16. I have worked with a lot of different clients in my time. That has never worked out. Ever. Not once.
We should always pause there. Just let that sink in.
Yeah. It's worked 0 times.
Yeah. Here's another question from, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Petra Druselius. And she asks, we really need a design leader within the company who can advocate for the user and be the voice of the design team, but I have a hard time convincing management about it. Do you have any advice on how to convince them? Why is it important to have a design leader in the company?
Throw this in the chat. What's their
It's in the chat.
For?
Oh, sorry.
No, sorry. What is comment on this? What does leadership say? What's their response on why they're not going to do it?
So we'll let Petra think about that.
Okay.
Why do they seem unwilling?
So, well, I'll talk a little bit while she comments in there too. It seems to me, just from reading this right now, that there isn't really appetite for a design leader. You can push it, you can, but if you have to make a business case on why you need that, it would lead me to believe that the leadership has a certain expectation of design, and that expectation is what you have. If they felt that there was a need for design leadership, or that design is a change maker, then they would already have a VP of design or a CDO. You know, like, they kind of gave you that answer. If you have to build the case for something, you can. I mean, I've done that before. It's hard, and you have to do a lot of business value of a specific role, because a design leadership role is expensive. And basically, like, you have to justify that cost at a 3x. So let's say that a design leadership role costs 6 figures. You have to justify 3 times that to leadership in order to make it worthwhile. Okay. They are not sure they need it, and it's up to us to say, okay, so you have to prove why you need it. You can address that with me offline. If that's their response to you, and that doesn't seem promising.
Yeah. Although one would think that maybe just pushing back a bit and saying these are the benefits and seeing if you have alignment on that.
Yeah. I mean, if you want a solution oriented, I can do that too. So you can do a parallel case, which is like, let's say I'm making up this, like, let's say you're trying to get a VP of design. So a parallel case is, hey, we have a VP of HR, we have a VP of engineering, we have a VP of product or whatever that is. Here's the value that they provide, and you map that case to design. Okay. So that's one thing you do. It's a parallel business case. Another aspect too is you could do something where VP of design usually sits at the strategic level of design, where you can make the case for having a strategist, having the strategic level of design embedded at that level gives you X value. And there's probably an argument in there that when design is elevated, you have a bigger return on investment. You can pull the McKinsey study that came out a couple of years ago. IBM did a really good study a couple of years ago. Envision has stuff where you could actually show them documented work of when this role is in place, here's the business value of it. Okay, so those are 3 things that you could try. And ping me next week, let me know how it goes.
And there's always the possibility that they don't need a design leader. I'm just saying that because it could be a very tiny company, or maybe
sure. Yeah,
it's too early for that.
Yeah, I was speculating on that.
I'd like to pick a question. I've received a question from another anonymous channel, and I think it's worthy of some attention. And the one is, this person writes, you mentioned that you have ADHD, and the person writes that one of the features of an ADHD brain is that it sometimes spirals away and wants to dig really deep into a problem. And can you relate to this? And then there are 3, maybe I should actually paste this in the chat. There are 3 follow-up questions. How do you manage your time schedule when you constantly get impulses and ideas that the brain wants to act on? How do you wind down after a day when your brain has been very active? And finally, how do you level with neurotypical people?
Okay. When I get these questions, I make it very clear. I am not a therapist. I don't play one on the internet. I do not have a doctorate degree. I encourage anyone who has a neurodiverse function in any way, shape, or form to really talk to your mental health provider, to talk to specialists. Like, there are great doctors out there, and especially in the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of really good specialists who are working that. You are looking for a doctor who specializes in executive functioning. I think they're called an ABB in the States. I'm not sure what they are in Europe. I just want to get that out there. I bring this up because I am also ADHD index is really high in the design, engineering, and product space. I don't know why. I think someone should do a study on that, but it's pretty common. So the spiraling, medication, because usually the spiraling is it's a chemical function in the brain. So you want to work with a psychiatric doctor, not a GP, someone who understands how chemicals work in the brain to help mitigate that stuff. There's a lot of really good methods out there to help you get to a baseline. Help you do that. There was actually a really good book I read recently called Chatter, where it talks about people's internal monologues. And I think that index is a little bit on the ADHD side, but really the good and bad of those internal monologues, when they kind of go out of control, they have a helpful function. They also have a really harmful function too. Like, I thought the book was a really good, it's a light read, so you can kind of get through that. Talk therapy, really good. I think that's great, having a therapist to kind of talk through the ruminations and the spiraling that's going on. It's really kind of getting that, getting a handle on that. So those are some, like, just from medical perspective, like those are some things to consider. But again, talk to someone who knows you, who understands your history as an individual, because this is a very nuanced aspect of the medical profession. One of the things, going to the next question, one of the things about being neurodiverse is that you have to manage your time really well. It's really important. So you have to write things down. You have to have a schedule, because if it's not written down, it's not in schedule, it doesn't get done. And that's really common. Like I'm working with an ADHD design leader right now, and just solving that thing, to write the to-do list down, to have the schedule kind of blocked, like it's just making his life a whole lot easier. How do I manage my time? I kind of gave you my what a day in the life of Andy is. I make a very concerted effort to have breaks during the day. I'm also, I mentioned, a pretty significant introvert, so I need that time to recharge my battery. Like there are the extroverts where you get energized by being around a lot of people. I get drained. So I need to kind of do that time in order to make it work. I actually have you could do 10-minute breaks during the day. You could do like a long lunch. The morning and at the end of the day, like doing that walk, really good exercise, which helps the blood flow, which kind of diminishes a lot of the cortisol, which is the stress hormone that gets released in the brain. Like that's always really, really good. I try to do things that are not design related. Reading, I do like woodworking. I build furniture in my spare time. Like having a hyper-focused thing that's not work related, super, super helpful. Reading, TV, anything that can switch your brain from a problem-solving mode to an exploratory mode. When I say that, meaning, so reading, like read fantasy books. Don't read like histories. Don't read like fact books or textbooks. Like read something that allows your mind to kind of go off and create worlds that actually mitigates a lot of the like the chatter and the stress and the spiraling. So I think that's really good. And your last question was, how do you level with a neurotypical people? I don't know what that means. So if you want to clarify that question, I'm more than happy to answer it.
I'm going to be presumptuous and answer and say, I think it might not answer, but I think that person means, how can I be open with people around me that I have, that I'm neuroatypical or just have other needs?
Have the conversation.
Yeah.
It's always good to give context to, like saying, hey, I have a user manual that I wrote. It's like 3 pages about Andy that I give to every manager that I've ever worked with and every team that I have.
Wow.
Which I think is great. Like you get like a VCR and a TV, they all have user manuals, how to use it. Like when people work with each other, when they join teams, I have no idea what to do. So like, I think it's great. Yeah, it's great. Like I have a 3-page user, like, here's how I work. Here's what I do. And I actually, I have a copy of mine if you want to socialize a document, where it's basically like, here's how I work. Here's how I work above. Here's how I work with my direct reports. Here's how I work with my teams. Here's the best value that I can provide with you. And then I talk about like my introvertness, where I'm like, hey, like if you throw stuff at me, like a bunch of things, I'm gonna freak out. So give me time to process. And this is actually something I work with my manager at GE, Rich. He was like, this is amazing. I was like, yeah, it's really good. I was like, look, here's the best way to work with me. Consulting companies do this a lot. Companies where there are big teams where you're kind of going back and forth, it's helpful. It just kind of like shortens the time for how people can work well together. So have a user's manual. Like
that is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that. So if you are willing to share yours, that would be incredibly helpful.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And then I'm going to give it to my wife. I'm sure that it works in all kinds of contexts.
Well, if you are going to do that, David, just make sure that she understands the context and she gives you one. Because
I look forward to that.
You got to have 2 of them.
Yep.
Otherwise, it's like, here's how I work.
I like back rubs. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been really, truly amazing. It feels like we could ask you about anything and get something useful out of you. So I have one final question, and then I'm going to ask you whether there's something you'd like to leave us with, if there's something we haven't brought up. So one question is, okay, if you answered the question about ADHD, and a lot of those answers just felt like they applied to us all, regardless of our neuro style. So what fantasy book should we be reading to relax? What would you recommend?
I was gifted Les Mis by Victor Hugo, which is like a very large book. And I'm loving it. So I'm really interested in that. I think the writing style is just lovely, and I'm like totally into it. I'm a big Harry Potter fan. Like I've read the series multiple times. I'm not quite a fan
Victor
of J.K.
Hugo.
Rowling. Victor Hugo.
And the title was?
Les Miserables.
Ah, Les Miserables.
Yes.
Is that a fancy book? Well, it's, I guess
I don't. Oh, you said fancy or fantasy?
I thought you said fantasy earlier, but I think you just meant fiction, basically.
No, yeah, anything where you're creating worlds.
Ah.
So not like a history book, not like a textbook, not like that. So it's where your brain is creating a world. So like I'm reading the story of Les Miserables and Cosette and Marius, and you're just kind of like going through this, and I was like, oh, cool, it's like world building, and you're creating it. It's super relaxing. Yes, that's really interesting stuff. Jennifer made a note in the chat, any books on design leadership? What's really challenging is there aren't a lot of really good books on design leadership. It's one of the reasons why I'm writing one. But there's a lot of really good books on business leadership. There's a lot of really good stuff on behavioral leadership, like how to lead people. Ping me offline, and I'll give you a list. I have a bunch of books where I could recommend to people, but that's kind of the short version of that answer.
Is there anything you would like to leave us with? Something that we haven't touched on, or something you would like to encourage us to do? It's very broad.
Thank you all for sharing your lunchtime with me. I think there was like 40, 50, 60 people today, which is great. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really excited to come visit everyone in about a month or so. It's going to be really great. I'm super accessible. You can find me on LinkedIn. You could just Google Andy LaMonica. I have a ton of stuff out there. You could also reach out through David. Like if there's any follow-up from this, I'm going to scrape the channel and answer any questions that have come up from that. So it's really good. One of the things which I like to leave people with is, I know we talked a lot about stuff, and it was some pretty heavy stuff and some like design-centric stuff. I get it. Like our job is hard. Like, and I say this being one of you, like I'm a designer too. Like I like making these. This is hard. The thing that I would like you to take from this session is just, none of this is easy. We're all trying to figure this stuff out. So just be kind. And especially to that person you see in the mirror every day, like be kind to that person. This is good. Like we get paid to do something that we really care about. And we work with, for the most part, we work with some great people. So thank you all very much for your time. Really appreciate it. David, thank you. The host with the most, man. That was amazing. So super, super cool. Anything I can do to help you before we jump?
Thank you, Andrew. That was such a nice ending. Cannot be improved upon. And thank you for your time. And I have lots of things. I'm going to write a user manual for myself, and I'm going to schedule asking for help. See, all that just from this hour. Thank you so much. And thank everyone for listening, and hope to see you all live and talk to you all. That's going to be, I'm so psyched. That's going to be so wonderful. Until then,
take care.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.